Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. Can you not hear me?
I cannot hear you, Eugene. I'm not
assuming
sure if you
that's
can
what I
hear
assumed.
me. Can you hear me? You can hear me. I can't hear you. Hang
Well,
on. Let me figure that out. I could hear you before we
Hopefully
started.
the masses can hear me. I don't know.
Huh.
Could be either way. I don't want to
Well,
remain
something
silent.
weird with the
in case
sound.
others
Sorry for
can
the
hear me.
faces, guys.
Well, I'm not even on the chat. What are they saying in the chat? Can they hear me?
Huh.
That's how you know. Yay, nay. Anything, Rania? Oh, well, weird. Apparently the chat
I guess
says
I
they
can
can
hear from
hear.
them. I'm so sorry.
Okay. Well, I mean, I
Wait,
guess
I
it's
can hear you
better
from
that
my
it's
computer. You
Rania.
can talk again. I'm
not
sorry
us.
we're doing this on air. What a way to start.
Well, there's sometimes only one way.
Audio
See if
audio
we
is
can
giving
get
us
this
a
together.
problem today.
Just give us
You
one
can hear me
second
okay,
here.
yeah?
I can. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we can go ahead then.
We can. Hello,
Well,
everyone.
that's Rania Kalik who's just talking. I'm Eugene Perrier. Welcome to the Freedom Side here on Breakthrough News. Of course, you are watching on YouTube, so want to remind you, of course, to go ahead and hit subscribe and hit the bell so that you can get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to. Rania, are there other things you want our listeners to know?
Absolutely, Eugene. Since you asked, you can help support all of our excellent, if I may say so myself, journalism here at Breakthrough News by becoming a member of Breakthrough News. You can do that by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where becoming a member gives you access to exclusive content and exclusive merch, like this very cool mug that says Breakthrough News on it, and then has our BT logo with doesn't come with a lipstick stain, guys. Sorry, that's just me.
Unless you donate $20,000.
I will actually, we will mail you the
20,000 USD.
Wow. If somebody were to pay that much for a mug with my lipstick on it, it's all yours.
Honestly, I'm a little
but
worried
no,
about
more-
you, but I'll take the money.
I'm a little concerned, but I will take your 20,000. But no, in all seriousness, independent media like Breakthrough News can only exist with the support of our listeners and viewers. And we do have a pretty massive audience, which is very exciting. I mean, I think we're over 700,000 YouTube subscribers
I think
at this
we're
point.
actually over 730,000.
Yeah. So I think that if we could, if you do have the means, I know not everybody does, but if you do have the means, it's more important than ever that independent media receive your support, that Breakthrough News receive your support so we can keep going and keep growing. So do become a member at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And also make sure if you are watching to please smash that like button, you guys. It helps us in the algorithm. Button. Always. I love that. That never gets old. And also, if you want to give a one-time donation, you can go to breakthroughnews.org or you can throw one into the live YouTube chat.
Yes, no, absolutely. And appreciate everyone out there who is already donating in one way, shape, or form. Really appreciate everything you've done to help us keep getting to this point and to help us keep going moving forward. So excellent time to join that excellent group of people. Rania, before we get started here, waiting for our first guest, I saw something earlier today that was, I have to say, pretty shocking to me, actually, regarding the ongoing genocide in Gaza. It's the average Gaza resident since January has been forced to survive on roughly 245 calories a day. Now, for those who don't count your calories, roughly 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day is what you're supposed to, take in human beings on a regular basis. And the average person in Gaza over the past several months since January has been forced to subsist on average 245 calories a day.
That's insane. 245 calories is literally like 2 eggs and a coffee.
Yes.
With milk.
Yeah.
Like, that's like barely a meal. I mean, that's actually, I don't even know if that, like, that's insane. That's an insane statistic. I'm also sure you saw the latest news, Eugene, that Biden had his phone call with Benjamin Netanyahu and said, according to the White House, like, statement afterwards, he emphasized that the strikes on humanitarian workers and the overall humanitarian situation are unacceptable. And he made clear the need for Israel to announce and implement. Okay, that's blah, blah, blah, blah, blah. But he also said that if this continues, or if harm to civilians continues, he will consider in the future leveraging military aid. But it's like still so vague and unclear. I still don't think that's going to happen. Meanwhile, AIPAC has organized this trip of all these Republican members of Congress who visited Benjamin Netanyahu today and did like a press conference.
Amazing.
And it's just completely insane. I mean, and of course, like, the world is rightfully outraged that these humanitarian aid workers from all these different countries were killed. But like, I can't help but wonder, I know the answer to this, Eugene, but why did it take, like, why is there more outrage? I should put, why is there more outrage over the killing of this handful of international humanitarian aid workers? There's more outrage for that than the killing of over 30,000 Palestinians in Gaza, including like 180 Palestinian humanitarian aid workers who have been killed. I'm just like, this is too far. And I'm glad it's too far. It should be too far. But you know what should have been too far? The killing of 1,000 children, 2,000 children, 10,000 children, 15,000 children in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I mean, the level of dehumanization and the cheapness for Palestinian and Arab life is on full display right now. It has been for almost 6 months. 6 months.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm just now getting angry, but
No, you were right on. I mean, it really is amazing for 6 months. I mean, 33,000 people have died. I mean, yeah, I mean, it really, and of course, it's obviously more than that when we talk about people who are under the rubble. And quite frankly, you know, obviously death is the worst possible scenario, but I think it's important to also remember that a lot of the injuries, which I think are well over 70,000, are, you know, totally and completely life-altering injuries. It's not as if people, you know, like cuts and scrapes, you know, it's people losing both feet and an arm, both hands, you know, being totally covered in burns. I saw one of the worst picture of his young boy is totally covered in burns, his entire torso. You know, but I think, you know, vis-a-vis the issue what you're saying about World Central Kitchen, I think it's a good point. I mean, I'll make one slight edit to that, which is that it's overwhelming the outrage in the West. And I think that speaks to one of the most important things about America and Europe is that people are so insulated and have been so inundated for basically your entire life with this sense of otherness, like these other people outside of there, that even when you feel bad about it or upset or you think it's tragic or whatever it may be, of which there are obviously many, many millions of people in America and Europe who feel that way, tens of millions of people, that you still feel like one step removed from it. And I think when this World Central Kitchen thing happens, it reminds people of what a lot of other people around the world feel, who, especially people who live in countries that are frequently targeted, you know, by Israel, by the United States, that like, yeah, it can be anybody at any time under any circumstance, that these people are totally brutal, totally, you know, just every negative thing I could possibly say. And I think you can sort of know it intellectually, but this is one of those things that I think for a lot of people, and I think to your point, I think it's very unfortunate. And I think it's something that people in the United States and Europe should think a lot about. Like, how come when U.S. soldiers die, it seems a war seems worse than when there's no boots on the ground, right? But I do think it's that conditioning, and it shows how much dehumanization in between the wars and the conflicts goes on in this country with how we describe Palestinians, how we describe Arabs, how we describe Muslims, and how affected so many people have been, that it takes something like this to cause a lot of people to be like, whoa, this is like totally out of control.
yeah, or it takes like a white person saying it. And I mean, this is something to maybe dissect later, because I do appreciate like white people getting up and saying it, if that's what it takes to move people and to make them understand. But it's just incredibly frustrating, and it does speak to the fact that you're right. Like, everybody's just been conditioned to see these people as killable, and like they die. That's just normal. It's normal for Palestinians to be killed and to die. It's normal for Arabs to be killed and to die. It's normal for like everybody in the global South to just be killable and to die. in all kinds of horrific, atrocious ways. And yeah, it's just, just 15,000 children.
Yeah.
15,000 children. 10 children a day, Eugene, have amputations.
Yeah.
A limb is amputated. 10 children a day. That's 70 children a week. Like, that's a crazy number of children having amputations. Amputations. And you're right, life-altering injuries like those, their lives are never going to be normal, and they're never, well, I don't want to say normal, but they're never going to be the same. And they're probably not going to get the care they need because the one prosthetics hospital in Gaza was taken out by the Israelis. Yes. I'm sure there was some excuse about Hamas was there. Hamas is apparently everywhere, including in every single car that the aid workers were in, all three of them. The Israelis
including the
tried
car
to claim.
with the aid workers that they told Israel what they were doing. I mean, it just everything about it. It's like they told you exactly where they were going. Obviously, they went on some sort of mission, but like there's also a flip side to that coin that, and I've seen some aid workers speaking out about this, that when you were giving out aid, you were giving out aid to whoever is needed. So you were going to work with whoever the most effective authority figure is to make sure that your aid being given out is being given out effectively. Now, I'm not saying that Hamas is working with them or anything like that. I don't want to make that accusation, but I think whether we're talking about Afghanistan, whether we're talking about Gaza, whether we're talking about Iraq, whether we're talking about Libya, or any of these, Sudan right now, any of these other places, the people who are trying to deliver the aid are trying to get the food to people the best way they can, in the most fair way they can, the most equitable way they can, which means that obviously they need to organize that. They are not a government, right? Aid workers are not a government. They're just there providing a service. So somebody has to help, secure the scene. I mean, I don't know. Just the fact that that's even considered illegitimate. Like say Hamas was in the car. Say they were there where they were giving out the food. Well, I mean, they're the elected government of Gaza. So is it that surprising that the elected government would be trying to facilitate aid going out in the area in which they control? And why does that all of a sudden make the aid deliveries, the aid workers, the aid delivery system, like why does that make it okay to assault them? I mean, it's just like if there was an earthquake in Israel, you know what I'm saying? And there was an earthquake in Israel and the Red Cross was there and somebody launched a missile and killed the Red Cross, delivering aid to people in Israel somewhere. The Israeli government would be up in arms,
Yep. Well, it's also, I mean, that's because the entire point is to prevent aid from going in. I mean, after this intentional killing that the Israelis think we're stupid enough to believe wasn't intentional, after these intentional murders, you had the UAE cancel whatever aid that they were facilitating into the Strip. You had a few other organizations because they can't guarantee the safety of the people facilitating it. And that was the point. Like, we know that Israel, as Yoav Gallant said early on, wants to starve the so-called quote human animals in Gaza, right? And so how do you make sure everybody starves? You prevent any aid from going in. And it doesn't matter where that aid is coming from, even if it's coming from people who are actually pro-Israel. In the case of this organization, I mean, the leader of it was basically a pro-Israel guy. And what's so insane now is he's rightfully angry that his workers, who he was coordinating with the Israeli army to get in and out safely, and they still got murdered. Because he's upset about that and he was like making statements about that, you've got all these crazy like pro-Israel fanatics accusing him of a blood libel. I don't know if you saw this, but they're accusing him of a blood libel and of being anti-Semitic and all kinds of things. And I'm like, dude, this guy was like on your side. 100%. Israel literally, will kill people. They will do anything to enforce their disgusting famine policy, including kill people who are on their side.
Yeah, well, I saw someone on Twitter. I'm trying to remember who this was. I think it was Dr. Stephen Thrasher. I don't know. I like to give people credit when I say something, but he made a really good point about this. And he said the attack on World Central Kitchen is like the postcards they used to make of lynching, that would circulate in communities, that it's deliberately designed to send a message about who's in control, who's not in control, and that you too will be targeted if you step out of line. And I thought that was a really good parallel. I mean, because I think, obviously the context of lynchings and, extrajudicial punishment against collective punishments of a whole community is relevant. But in terms of the warning aspect of it, I think it's very important. And it really is amazing. And you were right. I had seen the news of Biden and Netanyahu's call that it barely lasted 30 minutes. And I feel like that in and of itself was leaked to be like, oh, Biden's really angry, and they couldn't get on the same page. But it's interesting to me, and John Kirby came out subsequently afterwards and said that what they would like to see and what they are hoping to see is a drastic increase in humanitarian aid over the next several days. Now, of course, that means nothing, because what is a drastic increase? I mean, when you're going up from like basically nothing, almost anything can be a drastic increase, even if it's totally inadequate. But on top of that, it's just like everything about this is so ridiculous. I mean, obviously the U.S. has a huge amount of leverage. They're about to send them billions more dollars in aid and weapons. All they have to do is say, well, you can either do X or we will just cut off all money and weapons, and things will start to happen very quickly. So the fact that the Biden administration is trying to act as if they care about this when the whole world is fully aware of the fact that they have leverage. And I mean, it's becoming, the mask is being ripped off, and I think the implications of this are still so unknown. I mean, I saw even Jon Favreau, the Obama aide guy, the crooked media guy, whatever him and the other guy are who do the podcast, that liberals love. Obviously, I'm not a liberal, I'm a communist, so I can't remember the other guy's name nor the name of the podcast. But he basically
Saves America.
Yes, Pod Saves America.
God, name, yeah.
John Favreau made this point yesterday. I saw a couple days ago in response to a Politico article. He was like, the president does not get any credit for being quote unquote angry when he does not do anything whatsoever to put any pressure or use any leverage to stop them. So I say that to say, wow, if even like the most mainstream of mainstream Democratic Party people are seeing it, if even like the New York Times is having to have headlines that's like, but will he use his leverage? I mean, it's so hollow. And the fact that they're even doing it, I did see someone else say that Baghdad Bob has nothing on John Kirby. Now, whatever, take that as you will. But it's becoming so almost cartoonish how callous they have become, how transparently false they have become. And when we talk about the implications for this in the elections, I think it's very significant because there are a lot of things that motivate people. And I think there are probably a lot of people who, they see Trump, they see some of the just insane things that he's saying, his policies, which are obviously terrible in every possible way. And they're thinking, I just don't know if I can not vote for Biden. Like, I'm upset, I'm mad about this. But, then when you look at it like this, it's almost like you look at the Biden administration people talking, and it's like they're putting their middle finger up at you. I mean, it's like they just basically just like they don't care. 75% of Democrats say they want a ceasefire. So it may be one thing if you say, well, we're trying and we couldn't get it. But then to do this, like just this unbelievable theater that they do every day in these press conferences, I think that is as damaging as anything else, because even some people who are on the fence with them, I think will feel like, no, they need to be taught a lesson in this election, because you can't just ignore 75% of us who are saying you have to change policy and just have your spokespeople sticking up their middle finger at us every single day. It can't be done. But, you can still have Hillary Clinton out giving press conferences. I don't know if you saw this, or interviews. And she said, everyone who's upset with Biden just has to get over it. Well, as Stephen A. Smith said on CNN, how'd that work out for her in 2016?
I mean, it's amazing they're even letting her go out and talk, given that she basically said, get over yourselves to anybody who's like, I don't want to vote for either of these people. And I think it's amazing the level of entitlement of Democrats. But I want to read a tweet before we open to our first guest. I do want to read a tweet from, I guess we can call her friend of the show, comedian Kate Willett, who's excellent. She tweeted the following: centrist Democrats will really be like, Biden is funding the most progressive genocide in United States history. And I think she's absolutely right. I mean, that's exactly what we're going to end up hearing is like, and I think we've already heard versions of that is, oh, like you're upset with Biden's policy. Imagine what Trump's would be. Oh, would Trump's policy be genocide, you guys? Because it's already happening. Anyway.
No, it's true. I mean, I'll just add my one final thing. I actually did see someone on CNN say that to justify voting for Biden. They said Trump would level Gaza. And I just thought, I mean, they're leveling Gaza right now. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, it was like a fantasy world. And the woman, I don't even know who she was, some completely random person, one of these talking heads. She was so confident when she said it too. And I just thought, wow, I really just hope the check is clearing, because you could not be more idiotic on purpose. But
you should clip that.
I should have. I could probably find it. It was so dumb it has to be rocketing around the internet.
Like juxtapose it to the images of Gaza having been leveled.
Where you been, buddy? Well, anyway, we want to turn attention to another important issue in West Asia, and that is the recent elections, local elections in Turkey, which, of course, have some implications for the broader political scene there, which I think, as anyone who's following knows, has huge implications for the Middle East, for the war in Ukraine, for many different things, including for the Turkish working class. So we are very happy to be joined for the show to talk a little bit about this election by Ani Çinar, who's a Central Executive Committee member of the Turkish Communist Party. Anil, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's really a pleasure to have you here. As you may know, there was a lot of headlines here in the U.S. The day after the election, and it was being presented as this huge, major defeat for Erdoğan, for his party, the AKP. And I'm curious, how you look at that. I mean, was it a big defeat for them? Is it a shift in the balance of forces? How are you looking at that kind of top line of the result?
Yes. Firstly, AKP suffered a huge loss of votes in the last election, and CHP came to the fore in many cities and districts that traditionally seem to belong to right-wing politics. And for a very long time, Erdoğan and AKP appeared to have power that could successfully survive the elections, at least in terms of voter support. So yes, the elections were a big defeat for Erdoğan after this picture, and it's a defeat for AKP. And it's also true that there are changes in the balance of powers, at least in the political arena. But from our perspective, the balance of powers has a meaning beyond the initiatives of individuals and parties in bourgeois politics. So we think that the balance of powers must be seen from the side of working class, and it must have a clear class content. That's why for us, what is important is that what kind of game the capitalist class is setting up, and which center of gravity the working classes and the revolutionary movement holds. I want to look into this in a little more detail, because this problem, that is the phenomenon of making sense of shifts in bourgeois politics, or more precisely, the phenomenon of getting excited about some changes in bourgeois politics, is not a problem specific to Turkey. I think you'll remember too how joyfully Joe Biden was welcomed when he became president. Even in Turkey, there were leftists who commented that we were entering a better era after Trump's presidency. Anyway, that's why we felt the need to make a warning in our first statement on the latest elections. And that's why we stated that this outcome of elections is a false spring. Yes, after long periods of power and seemingly permanent governments, slightest change brings excitement. We do not deny this fact. But we have to say that this is not a spring weather, so to say. What is important for us is whether revolutionary politics has become stronger or not, and whether the crisis experienced by the capitalist class have opened up space for a revolutionary program. The picture that emerged in the last elections shows that this is not the case at all. Also, it shows that the capitalist class is simply playing a game and is thinking of avoiding the heavy burden that will be placed on the working classes in this way. That's why in this picture we see not a spring, but a false spring. But of course, you may ask, what has changed then? For this, I need to explain how the surprising election result came about in the first place. First of all, we left behind one of the most unexciting and dull elections in the Turkey's history. I must say, it's a very strange but important that such an unexpected picture emerged from such an unexciting elections. Yes, no one expected such a result. Both the AKP and the opposition party, CHP members, were somewhat surprised by this result. That's why the idea that the elections result where a major defeat was widely accepted, not only in the international media, but also in Turkey. Because everyone in Turkey knows that CHP and other opposition parties performed very poorly in the previous elections and after. CHP became increasingly right-wing and showed an unconvincing performance. And AKP made good use of this unreliable and unconvincing image of the opposition parties. Of course, this doesn't mean that the AKP is working better and making good election preparations, but thanks to such an opposition, he had the opportunity to play the stability card. Because in the previous elections, large segments of society in Turkey turned towards the stability shield, so to speak. After the economic difficulties, a chaotic world, and earthquake, and the AKP used exactly this to close a very difficult election ahead. But the last elections coincided with a period when it was accepted that the AKP government would continue for a while. In other words, the pressure for stability in society has somehow eased. But the anger and feeling of insecurity created by the high cost of living became increasingly dominant, because the bitter pill was put into the meal by Mehmet Şimşek, the head of economy in Turkey. The most affected by this austerity policies were minimum wage earners and retirees and small tradesmen. So it's clearly seen that the reaction votes against AKP root in such a class agenda, and big capital evaluated this in two ways, actually. On the one hand, they had the opportunity to complain about current policies as if they were not the main cause of the high cost of living. With the AKP winning in the 2023 elections, they have a government that will take the chestnuts out of the fire, so to speak. But on the other hand, they made preparations for the transition to post-Erdoğan era. They provided tremendous media support and financial resources to some politicians, especially Ekrem İmamoğlu. By tampering with the tensions within AKP, they paved the way for the alternative political Islamist forces. In short, they did whatever was necessary for so-called smooth transition in Turkish politics. The latest election results show that the big capital is successful in setting up their game in this respect. And I think we need to mention about Ekrem İmamoğlu at this point. İmamoğlu has become a politician that has been studied step by step since at least 2019 elections, and in which big capital has invested heavily on him. And İmamoğlu is no different from other politicians regarding imperialist centers, NATO, or liberal economic order and right-wing politics. But it was possible to forget all this with a tremendous PR effort. So it's no secret that Koç family, one of the Turkey's most powerful capitalist families, has a strong hand here. Anyway, with the last elections, it seems that Turkey entered a long period of election-free years. We can say that this election offers signs of how the transition to the post-Erdoğan period will be achieved. In one of the most unexciting elections in its history, Turkey has come a long way in transitioning to the post-Erdoğan period. I think this is a blessing for the capitalist class. Big bosses gained the opportunity for a major political change with an election in which the masses did not mobilize at all, and the working class did not show their power. So to put it first, we can say that the current picture is a shift in weight between different actors of bourgeois politics, but this shift is largely taking place within the boundaries of the game established by the capitalist class, and in fact happening quite calmly. Of course, we also have things to do here. In a country like Turkey, no major changes without risks and crisis And of course, there will be some opportunities for revolutionaries too. But our primary duty today is to warn against the false hopes created by these elections.
Well, I wanted to ask Anil, many are saying that the losses of the AKP is partially a result of anger amongst voters that AKP has not taken firm action against Israel. How do you see this? And also, what can we say about the AKP position regarding Gaza?
I think this one is true. I said before that one of the most important reasons for AKP's election loss was the high cost of living and economics in general, but the Gaza issues very important. In fact, before coming to the Gaza issue, this needs to be understood better, the economy and other stuff, because the AKP's hypocritical attitude in Gaza and its corruption in other topics are, I think, part of the same picture. So we started to see this hypocritical attitude much vividly after the earthquake disaster we experienced. You all remember that disaster. After the earthquake in February 2023, the AKP government faced a moral and conscientious questioning by the people of Turkey. The credibility and prestige of the government was greatly damaged. Not only the weaknesses of the government were revealed, but also the large segments of society in Turkey had noted down, so to speak, the corruption and hypocrisy of the government and the religious sects following it. In fact, their weaknesses were strong enough to bring down the AKP, but as I said, both the capitalist class and international imperialist centers exploited these weaknesses. They used these weaknesses to create an AKP and Erdoğan that are winner in elections, but also controllable by them. Anyway, but these weaknesses did not disappear after all. And as the government of a country with such a difficult economy, and the AKP does not have a great opportunities, neither on Israel, nor on immigration, nor on distancing itself from the West. So AKP and Erdoğan tried to cover up the weaknesses and facts here with the images. They took advantage of hostility towards Arabs provoked in Turkey while organizing rallies for Gaza. This was hypocrisy. While defending Palestine on TV screens, he continued trade with Israel through backdoor in Turkey. Also, some of this trade was used directly against the Palestinians as military equipment, and that was just sad. We as TKP were among the first to voice and expose this hypocrisy, but of course everyone saw the hypocrisy here. As I said, an attempt was made to create an anti-Arab hostility in Turkey in a very planned way, while massive Palestinian protests were taking place all over the world. One reason why the streets remained so quiet in a country like Turkey was the general lack of energy created by election, but on the other hand was the hostility towards Arabs. AKP make use of it. But again, as I said, everyone saw the reality and everyone saw the facts. And of course, this created anger among AKP voters. And yet, neither AKP, the ministers, nor Erdoğan could provide satisfactory answers to the criticisms as well. All of this were used by capitalist class to weaken the AKP and exploit its internal tensions in the last election. For example, this is how it became possible for another party coming from the same Islamist tradition with AKP to become stronger, so-called welfare party. In short, yes, AKP is partially, the losses of AKP is partially a result of anger among voters, and AKP definitely took a hypocritic stand in this Gaza problem.
Well, and Neil, we are running up against time here, so we're going to have to move on, but we really appreciate you
Okay.
joining us so much, and we will certainly keep coming back to you and keep covering this because this is crucial to all world politics. But thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, the world is changing because of Gaza. I feel like I keep adding Gaza into everything, and probably people think that like Rania, the world's bigger than Gaza, but I really do think it's like impacting. But it really is. It's like impacting.
It is
everything
This
everywhere.
is a good example of that.
Yeah.
This is a very good example of that. We obviously saw it in the UK. We're seeing it in the United States. If you go to my Twitter page, if you want to, at Eugene per year, I did share an English language version of the TKP statement, False Spring, which I highly encourage people to read because this whole idea that there's like a new positive dawn coming in Turkey is a little bit of a false picture. And I encourage people to also look out for what's happening there in the protest against the stolen elections in several of the seats. So really appreciate Neil joining us, and we'll continue to cover that story. Now we are going to move our attention here to Latin America, and we are Argentina in particular, excuse me. We are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Zoe Alexandra, who's a journalist and the co-editor of People's Dispatch. Zoe, thank you so much for being with us.
So glad to be here.
Well, we're always happy to have you. We, I think, have had you on a couple times around the election in Argentina, just after Javier Milei became the president. Just sort of, I don't even really know how to describe him. A ne'er-do-well is maybe the nicest way I could do it. But some time has passed, so we thought it might be good to check in and just sort of see how things were going, so to speak. I mean, I think it was either going to be the worst presidency ever or the greatest, depending on what side of the political ledger you were on there. So where are we here, I guess, several months in now?
Well, I think even those who thought it would be the best presidency ever are definitely probably firmly on the side that is so far the worst presidency. Today's a good day to talk about it because yesterday, 11,000 people who worked in different state agencies, departments, ministries, lost their jobs. Their contracts were not renewed. And when they went to their places of work, on this day where their contracts would expire, trying to check to see if they lost their jobs, there are actually police at every single state entity to essentially secure the location, make sure that there weren't mass protests as there were. Police even went into the memorial, the ex-ESMA memorial, where the Argentine military used to torture and disappear, of the 30,000 victims of the last military dictatorship. Many of them actually passed through the ESMA, where they were, sent off in planes and then dropped out of the planes. So police re-entered ESMA for the first time since it was made a historical site to essentially quell protests because of the thousands of people that were just fired from their jobs, essentially. Extremely symbolic with the ESMA case, but, horrible. You saw videos of people who were, years away from retiring, years away from getting the pension that they worked so hard to get their entire lives just cut off. It's truly a travesty. There's a mass strike planned actually tomorrow in Argentina. Today, education workers were on a stage of massive protest, which has been brutally repressed. We know that Milei has sort of armed himself with a cabinet of very far-right and hard-right politicians, such as Patricia Bullrich, who was the Minister of Security under Mauricio Macri as well. She has had a very, very tough hand in terms of zero tolerance for protests. She, in the first weeks of Milei's presidency, instituted the anti-picket protocol, which essentially says anyone participating in a picket can be arrested. There's much heavier police presence. People who participate in any sort of action where the street is blocked, where transit is blocked, could lose their Social Security. We're talking about just the widest crackdown you can imagine. This week is also notable, if I may continue, because on Sunday, Milei, a very kind of ridiculous interview was published with CNN which is essentially the interviewer knowing that he can get views by just provoking Milei to say the most ridiculous things, because again, he's a ridiculous, extremist, far-right, anti-woman, anti-gay, anti-everything, anti-human rights person. So essentially the interview says, and what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? So he asked him, what do you think about Andrés Manuel López Obrador of Mexico? He says, he's ignorant. If he talks bad about me, then I'm happy about it. Okay, what do you think about Gustavo Petro? And he calls Petro a terrorist assassin. So it's been definitely a tumultuous week, to say the least, about that in Argentina. Milei is certainly, maybe he's performing in the way that he wanted to, but I don't think many people in the country are very happy with how things are going so far.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that interview, that CNN interview you mentioned, was interesting. And it had some repercussions. The Argentine diplomats were expelled from Colombia after those ridiculous comments that he made about the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro. And I just very quickly, also, I want to say People's Dispatch wrote up the tidbits from the interview, which is why I even know this, because I cannot understand Spanish. But I did see that the Mexican president responded to what was said about him, and I thought the response was really funny. So I want to quote it. AMLO said, Milei stated that I am ignorant because I called him a conservative fascist. Right. I still do not understand how the Argentines, being so intelligent, voted for someone who is not accurate, who despises the people, and who dared to accuse his countryman, Pope Francisco, of being a communist and a representative of the evil one in the earth, when it comes to the most Christian Pope and defender of the poor that I have ever known or heard. P.S. Hugs to Gustavo Petro. The P.S. killed me. But all that's to say, Zoe, obviously, he's upsetting his own people in his own country with his policies. But what does this mean so far regionally? Obviously, he's saying these things, provoking the progressive and leftist leaders in the region in whatever way he can. But what impact is his election having on the region? Is it galvanizing other far-right forces? Or is it empowering leftist forces to organize more? What do you have to say about that aspect of this?
Well, I'll also just add one other element about this interview. They asked him, Milei has been essentially standing alone on the continent in terms of his support of Israel. And he went so far in this interview to say that Israel has not committed a single mistake and has not overstepped in any way possible. So I think, just to give people who might not have that much context about Argentina, this is the kind of person he is. And regionally, it's actually having a huge impact. So not only, of course, is this spirit of integration being whittled down, he has made so many verbal attacks against other leaders in the region, but also he's currently trying to galvanize other regional leaders to lead a campaign of sanctions against Venezuela. So I didn't actually mention what he said about Nicolas Maduro, but on multiple occasions, he's called him a criminal, a terrorist, every single sort of bad word that you can think of, he's called Nicolas Maduro one of those. And concretely, he's trying to impose sanctions against Venezuela. So we know that in 2017, when the Lima Group was founded, the region had many right-wing governments, many conservative governments, Mauricio Macri, Sebastián Piñera, many other of the regional leaders, of course, Iván Duque in Colombia, who was the biggest stalwart against Venezuela. They all joined together in some sort of ridiculous unity to essentially attack Venezuela. And when the region actually collaborated with the United States in isolating Venezuela, in joining it in its diplomatic efforts to attack Venezuela, this had a huge impact. And one of the most positive developments of this progressive wave is that there is less regional pressure on Venezuela. We're seeing Nicolas Maduro being able to actually travel to Brazil and meet with his counterpart. The relationship between Colombia and Venezuela is at a historic high. Of course, right now it's a little rocky over the past week, but relationship had been completely closed off. Now the border is open. There's cooperation happening between the two countries. And now Milei is seeing this. Of course, he's backed by the U.S. loves that Milei is there, even if they say that they don't. And they're seeing an opportunity in someone who, once again, will be able to attack Venezuela from the region. unclear about how the other regional relationships will go. So far, Milei said that Argentina would not be part of BRICS, which was going to be a huge and very important opportunity for Argentina, which is struggling in a very deep economic crisis. This would have provided a lot of openings for it. It has not left any of the regional spaces, UNASUR, CELAC, etc. We'll see if he's actually going to withdraw Argentina from those. That would be another concrete impact of the regional relations. But so far, he's just managed to isolate himself, attack everyone around him, and say he prefers to do business with the United States and Israel over his neighbors.
Well, we'll see how that goes. I mean, it does. I mean, I know he said that he wasn't going to join BRICS. Have we heard anything, just briefly regarding some of the other sort of related arrangements, the Chinese currency swap, which, kept Argentina from going broke last year? I mean, some of these other things that I think fly under the radar that he was saying that he was going to immediately exit them. I wonder if perhaps he's sort of silently dropped some of that or if he's moving forward.
Yeah, a lot of his campaign rhetoric was just that. It was campaign rhetoric. It was agitational. I think I mentioned on this show or one of them before that he famously said he was going to dollarize the economy, which many people unfortunately took to mean that whatever they made in pesos would be the same number amount and that would just turn into dollars. Of course, that's not even what dollarization means. Dollarization hasn't gone forward. Dissolving the central bank hasn't gone forward. He did kind of walk it back on China because I think he realizes how much it is necessary to not completely break those ties. But, how long is that going to continue for? I think we're going to see. I think he's actually coming to terms with the brutal kind of reality of what it means to manage an economy. And a lot of the things that he promised are not going to be. I mean, of course, the harsh austerity and the complete disregard for human life within his country, yes. But I think dealing with the external debt, dealing with the IMF debt is a problem that he can't solve by firing 60,000 workers, which is what he plans to do. So I think, it's too soon to say how much he is and isn't going to engage with China. But from what it seems like, he hasn't walked back on all of those deals that his predecessor had made.
Mm-hmm.
And Zoe, how is the relationship with the Americans? I mean, all these Democrats, and we do have a Democratic administration right now, who are very much against far-right Donald Trump and the antics of these kind of far-right clowns. And, Trump is the biggest threat ever, and so is anybody like him, and that's why we have to get out and vote in November. So I imagine the Biden administration must be up in arms over this far-right clownish Argentinian president. Am I right, Zoe?
No. I think clear in your intonation. They're definitely not. I mean, they did make statements. Oh, wow, this guy's crazy. I mean, it's hard. You're kind of forced to when someone says such violent and insane things. But important to note, yesterday, Laura Richardson, the sweetheart of Southcom, who really is in the current moment kind of someone everyone in Latin America loves to hate because she, as they say, says the quiet part out loud. Like, our military presence is important to secure resources in Latin America, and the region of Latin America is important for having access to oil and minerals and all of these other things, which U.S. capitalism needs to survive. And so she is there right now. He came to the United States. He met with different members of the Biden administration. They said relations have never been better. We've seen a lot of different magazines sort of praising his economic policy, which is just insulting. We saw him actually attend CPAC. Great praise for Donald Trump. He loves Donald Trump. He's willing to work with Biden, but he actually would prefer Donald Trump. So, yeah, he's definitely cozying up for sure. It's seeing him at CPAC was truly a full circle moment, I think.
Oh.
Well, I guess at least there were very few people at CPAC this year. Maybe that's what I wasn't there, but that's what I heard. It was like a record low attendance. So maybe that's our saving grace here, is that he was not more widely heard. Nonetheless, well, very interesting on a range of different fronts here. Obviously, you guys are covering this very closely, as well as Well, basically everything in Latin America is being covered very closely by People's Dispatch, just like pretty much everything in the world. So peoplesdispatch.org. And if you are struggling with the volume of great articles in People's Dispatch, tomorrow, Friday, I think at 10 a.m., it might be at 10:30 a.m., but go to there. 10 a.m.?
11.
Yes. 11 a.m. I'm wrong every time. Doesn't matter.
Can we
It remains
specify
there for
Eastern
days.
time, please, for those of us not in
Eastern
the same
time.
time zone as you
Eastern
guys?
So
time.
it's actually 8:30 Indian Standard Time, which is the time that maintains. Actually,
Okay,
no,
so-
it's at 9:30.
What's important is that if you go to the People's
what
Dispatch
time is this
YouTube on
program?
Friday, you will see Give the People What They Want with Zoe, with Prasanth, with Vijay Prashad, where they go over all of the previous week's stories so that you don't have to work too hard to find them yourself. But Zoe Alexandra, journalist, co-editor of People's Dispatch, as always, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Love Zoe. She's the best. Zoe's seriously the best. People's Dispatch is the best. If you're not like following People's Dispatch, like what are you doing with your life? Honestly, I just don't understand.
It's a good question. It's a good question. But
Mm-hmm.
you can start now. There's no judgment here. Peoplesdispatch.org.
I-
Maybe you've never heard of
Speak
it
for
before,
yourself,
so no
Pete.
judgment. No judgment. Now, if you've heard us say it a million times on the show and you've never been, we are judging you. But nonetheless, we would just be more than happy to have you check them out, peoplesdispatch.org. Well, we want to turn our attention here now to Iran. A lot happening in relationship to Iran, both in Iran and outside Iran. And obviously, a lot of it is wrapped up in the broader context of all the conflicts in West Asia right now. So we are very, very happy to be joined here by Mazda Majidi, who's a longtime anti-war activist and organizer with the Answer Coalition. Mazda, thanks so much for being back with us.
Hi, Eugene. Thanks for having me.
Well, we, of course, I think many people have undoubtedly seen what was the big news not that long ago of the Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Syria. You correct me if I'm wrong here, but maybe this is my tinfoil hat on. We've also seen some recent attacks inside of Iran in the southeastern part of Iran. So, I mean, it does sort of seem that the level of attacks and assaults are becoming more brazen, both directly on Iranian officials, by Israel, but also what seems to me to be something of a dirty war being waged on Iran, in this context. So I was hoping you could just talk about the significance of this in this moment.
Let me just start out by saying that according to the U.S. State Department, Iran is a state sponsor of terror. And isn't it ironic that every time you turn on the news, Iran is the victim of a terror attack, either directly by Israel or indirectly by people funded and supported by Israel and the U.S. But specific to the issue of the assassination of the Iranian commanders in Damascus, the person. There were a total of 13 people who were killed, including a top-ranking officer by the name of Mohammad Reza Zahedi, his deputy Muhammad Hadi Haj Rahimi, and 5 other officers. What was targeted was the Iranian consulate in Damascus, including the residence of the ambassador who escaped, who survived. But it was a major escalation. I mean, Zahedi was a senior commander, not quite at the same level of Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated by the Trump administration, but still very high ranking. So I think part of the question is the significance of this. Well, part of it is that, internationally it is recognized, and the UN Secretary General just emphasized that consulates and embassies are supposed to be safe spaces, and countries, are not supposed to target those. However, we know that Israel does not really abide by any international standards, and worst comes to worst, there'll be a resolution in the UN Security Council and the U.S. vetoes, although in one instance recently the U.S. Didn't veto. But of course, then the next question becomes enforcement. So basically, Israel can do whatever it wants, and the U.S. either completely supports it or it will support it and maybe say a couple of words of you should exercise more caution and things of that nature.
That's a really good point. While this was of course an escalation in the sense that the target of choice was an Iranian general, and also it took place in the consular part of the embassy compound. So they targeted an embassy, which is a very, very big deal. That's supposed to be off limits. This isn't the first time that the Israelis have targeted Iranians in Syria. It's not the first time that they've murdered Iranians in various parts of the world, including, in fact, inside Iran. There's a history of murdering Iranian scientists, for one. But can you talk a bit? I mean, I think it's easy to get not lost, but I think it's easy to, how the genocide in Gaza, for the genocide in Gaza to overshadow what's been an ongoing war on Iran by Israel for years and years and years. So can you talk a little bit about that background? Because obviously, Israel's kind of going after everybody right now, but this isn't happening just in the context of Gaza.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things, Rania, that's very true is that whatever else can be said of the Islamic Republic of Iran, they have been an open supporter of Palestinian resistance, and that support has come in many forms. It's been financial. It's been supporting them in terms of providing them know-how. It's been based on the notion that Palestinian resistance needs support. And even though now it may seem as if since October 7th and the genocide has started from Israel, many Arab states, many reactionary Arab states are, at least in words, supporting the Palestinian resistance and the people of Gaza. And we could get lost in the sense of thinking that all of these states are supporters of Palestine. But in fact, that's not true. And right up to October, I mean, Iran was being increasingly isolated for refusing to recognize Israel. Not just that, refusing to even participate in international sports competition against Israel, in always emphasizing that Israel was a colonial state, an illegitimate state. And so for these things, Iran is different from other states in the predominantly Muslim world in particular, that now are saying a few words against Israel. For that reason, and for many others actually, but for that reason, as one of the reasons, the US and Israel have wanted to overthrow the Islamic Republic. And many terror attacks against Iran have not been directly by Israel, but have been by terrorists or mercenaries who are paid within Iran to assassinate people. This would be the nuclear scientist who over the years got assassinated. This would be which there was an example just yesterday of people in the Baluchistan province, the separatists, who are armed to the teeth, attacking military outposts in two different cities, Chabahar and Vrask, and causing the killing of many. Their attack failed, but these terror attacks against Iran in different regions of Iran and outside of Iran have been ongoing. And let me just say this, that if Iran had done one of these things, including attacking an embassy, there would be within 48 hours the UN Security Council and additional sanctions and all kinds of things. When it comes to Israel, well, the US representative in the UN says, well, we're not even sure that this was a consulate of Iran's. Apparently, he thought it might be a shopping center or something,
Wow. Well, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the issue of sanctions, because that's the other side of of this is, the sort of sanctions element of war. And that has really come, back into the forefront quite a bit for those who pay attention to the news recently, because of the Iran-Pakistan natural gas pipeline, which Pakistan is trying to seek a waiver from the United States because they don't want to be hit by secondary sanctions for working with Iran. But if you could talk about that would be interesting, because I think that in and of itself is notable, but also how it fits into the broader picture of the sanctions that have been levied against Iran over the past several years.
Oh, I think it's very significant. Now, for those who follow the news on the pipeline, it goes back decades. I mean, the initial plan for it was started, I think, in 1995. So the idea was to have the pipeline going from the Pars gas fields in Iran all the way to Karachi in Pakistan. Pakistan does not have any oil or gas. It is reliant on importing, energy, and this would work very well for them. For Iran, it's very advantageous. First of all, it's a pipeline you build at one time, and then there's little cost in terms of delivery, but also the sanctions, Eugene, as you said, it's a major thing. There has been intense pressure on Pakistan up to now not to proceed with this thing. There have been contracts signed many years ago. The Iranian side of the pipeline right up to the border, reports are that it's been ready since 2013, 14, something like that. That part has been ready. But every time Pakistan wanted to do something concrete in terms of building its side of the pipeline, there was a lot of pressure and they put it in the back burner. So just recently, and this is very significant, Pakistan signed off on starting the construction of the pipeline. Now, there's two things that's very significant in this. One is of course, when Iran is under sanctions, every country that deals with Iran gets punished. It doesn't have to have any deals with the U.S. because it has to go through the international, monetary systems and SWIFT and all of that. So that's one thing. But for Iran, it's been particularly advantageous to work with countries that are strong enough that, are not deterred strongly by U.S. sanctions, such as China. And a big part of Iran's oil is being sold to China. The other thing is neighboring countries. And the advantage of that is that a lot of what Iran has had to do in terms of trade is barter. And if you're dealing with a neighboring country and you give them gas and you get wheat or whatever the case might be, it's a lot easier and it kind of bypasses the whole system that the U.S. would have to use to, put sanctions or fines on other countries. So that would be an advantage for Iran as well, the gas going to Pakistan and in exchange receiving commodities and possibly other services, entirely bypassing the sanctions that basically trace dollar transfers.
And then I'm curious, well, this is kind of a two-pronged question, but in terms of Iran's ability to continue to develop and be an economically viable country under these circumstances, how important has the, I guess, I'm going to use the word normalization, I guess, even though we usually use that in the Israeli context, but how important has the normalization between countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, or even like Iran and the UAE? They have a pretty good relationship now. The Iranians have a good relationship with Turkey for the most part at this point. How important is that decrease, I would say, like an Iranian isolation in the region in the last few years to Iran's ability to function right now? And then moreover, how important are the sort of Russia and China angle to this? Because Russia and China are two countries that do a lot of business with Iran, whether we're talking about, the ability to sell products to China, buy from China, or even do, weapons development that, they can then sell to the Russians, for example. How important have those two aspects been with regard to Iran economically? And I mean, would you put that in the category of speaking to this kind of emerging shift in the global order where there are these other poles of power that make it possible for countries that are isolated by the U.S. to actually still, exist and feed their people?
I think it's very important. And I think part of that is it's not even so much the importance of alternate poles of power. I mean, that's important, but I mean, in reality, BRICS is not an extremely united, coherent front. It's not going to be a match in and of itself to U.S. dominance. But the end of isolation of Iran with respect to, in particular, Persian Gulf monarchies is extremely important. As background for those listeners who may not be familiar with it, the reality was that these Gulf countries, led by Saudi Arabia and, of course, UAE and Kuwait, and, Oman and others, they were essentially waiting for the U.S. to find a way to overthrow Iran, along with Israel. I mean, that has been Netanyahu's focus for the last 20 years. It's been his number one vote getter, his tough line on Iran. But when they decided to reopen embassies with Iran about a year and a half ago and normalize relationships, I mean, there's economic trade that's important, of course, but more importantly, it shows that they gave up on the phase of the U.S. overthrowing the Islamic Republic. We have to also emphasize that this was a few months after the right-wing women women life freedom movement, when at least abroad it was portrayed as if the Islamic Republic was on the verge of collapse. And a few months after that movement fizzled, even in the blogosphere and so forth, the Saudi-led group of states decided, okay, well, Iran is not going anywhere. The U.S. is not going to overthrow the Islamic Republic, so we might as well normalize our relationships with Iran. I mean, I think one big component of this is that even when you have super reactionary right-wing states, which we historically refer to them as U.S. clients, correctly, they're ceasing to be complete U.S. clients. They're taking, in some cases, they're charting an independent path. As in this case, they lost faith in the U.S. being able to overthrow Iran, and they said, okay, to protect our own safety and security, to promote our security, let's just strike a deal with Iran. So in that sense, I think it is very, very important.
Well, Mazda, as always, really appreciate you joining us here on the show. Mazda Majidi from the Answer Coalition. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, I have to say something that is very, very important. And that is that I'm very excited to see that we have over 1,000 people watching the stream right now. I like to see that number. However, I only see a little over 600 have liked the episode. Now, I thought I had given up my finger wagging days against our audience for not smashing the like button. But apparently I have to go back to Bad Cop and yell again. I need you to smash that like button, you guys. You got to like the stream because it helps boost us in the algorithm. I mean, if 1,000 are watching and 1,000 haven't liked it, I mean, yeah, I assume there's like 50 hate watching. Fine. But the other 1,000 are watching, I assume, because they like it. So smash that like button. Please smash that like button.
And I think if you're hate watching, you should also smash it because we're giving you something to do. You're enjoying yourself.
Yeah, exactly. What would you be doing instead of Thursday?
So you do, in a way, you do like it. So
yeah, you're getting some source of supply from it,
Also, shout out to Far there in the chat for your donation. And also, I'm told a very nice sticker that you put there in the context of your donation in the chat. Shout out to you. Don't forget you can donate in the chat as well as patreon.com/breakthroughnews and become an ongoing donor. We want to turn our attention now to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which here in the United States has just had a big victory at Pitzer College. And to talk more about this, we are very honored to be joined by Bella Jacobs, who is with the Pitzer Students for Justice in Palestine. Bella, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here, and it was great to see the fruits of the labor of you and your fellow students. For those who maybe haven't seen, tell us what took place at Pitzer College with the cancellation of this study abroad in occupied Palestine.
Yeah, definitely. So we just had a major BDS victory at Pitzer College. And basically what happened is we had an institutional relationship with the University of Haifa, but we were able to, through our shared governance processes at Pitzer, shut the program down and close the program based on the fact that it doesn't align with Pitzer's core values. And Pitzer's an institution that prides itself on its core values of social justice, intercultural understanding, student engagement, and others. And we were able to write a proposal that proved that through a lot of Maya Wind, she's an Israeli scholar who is studying how Israeli universities deny Palestinian freedom. We were able to show how our partnership with the University of Haifa was a betrayal of Pitzer's core values. And because of that, then the program was closed. So we're really happy that it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, congratulations. This is such a big deal, and I hope it has a domino effect with other campuses around the country. Did you face an uphill battle? I mean, that's really cool what you described, the sort of idea of your school, like the social justice ideals that you connected that to. But as we know, across universities and colleges in the US, there is a heavy Israel lobby influence. There are groups that push back hard against any attempts by students or faculty to try to boycott, sanction, divest in any way whatsoever. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the struggles that you and your the other students who were involved in this perhaps faced while trying to get this passed?
Most definitely. So I will say that the wind I just described to you sounded nice and simple. We put in a proposal, it was approved. This is a continuation of a 6-year campaign from professors, students, and alumni to close Pitzer Haifa. And in 2018 and 2019, there was a similar campaign held where faculty voted to suspend our relationship with the University of Haifa, and then went on to College Council, which is a governance body made up of students, staff, and faculty. And it passed to suspend our relationship with the University of Haifa. However, it was then vetoed by our previous president, Melvin Oliver. And so, students and faculty, along with the alumni who were involved in that, they yep, there's Melvin Oliver. We were trying, we had to wait until we had a new president with new opportunities. And also, honestly, the situation has changed a lot. And we now have more faculty support, more student support. And we also have an alumni campaign where right now we have over 145 alums who have pledged not to donate until Pitzer takes up BDS values.
Wow. Well, I mean, this is, really, I have to say, this is a big victory. And I think it's really important for what has been happening, around the country in terms of campuses and students who have been, part of this huge movement of millions of people. I mean, I guess for you all, what is the importance of this in this moment? I mean, it's important, of course, at any time it had happened in any way, shape, or form, given the ongoing occupation. But I mean, given what's happening with the genocide in Gaza, I mean, talk about the importance of it and how it feels to have this victory now.
Yeah, I mean, this victory, it's really amazing. It's really exciting. It was definitely an uphill battle, and one that continues on. We're not stopping with just the closure of our partnership with the University of Haifa, and we're looking towards future goals, BDS goals. But the situation has never been more dire, and I think that this is a point in time where, with the current genocide in Gaza, like it has gone on so long that I think the American public is finally starting to realize that perhaps this current episode of violence that Israel's inflicting on Palestinians did not begin on October 7th. It began long before that. It began 75 years ago with the original Nakba, which is an ongoing, continued process of state domination. And so, yeah, this is really important. And I think also the importance of this happening at an American university, America has the most leverage in stopping this genocide and in ending the occupation. And, U.S. academic institutions play a vital role in that. And one of the things that I think is so amazing about the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is that it is a nonviolent source of pressure that we can use externally to try to, change the situation happening in Israel right now. And, this is what we keep saying to people is that if you abhor violence like we do, if you want to see the end of all violence for all people, then you should support BDS. And if you do not support BDS, then you're giving, there's not a lot of options left for people. And so I'm really happy to have this BDS win, especially at an American university.
I'm curious, you mentioned something about the situation has changed. And I'm thinking what you mean by that is the fact that the current situation we're in where we're watching a genocide unfold, and it's just one horror after another. I mean, I don't think any of us have ever seen anything like this. I think it's quite unprecedented. And it's probably radicalized. I know it's radicalized a lot of people. A lot of people are learning about this issue for the first time, and they're completely horrified. So I guess I'm wondering, what is the change you're seeing? Have you had more interest in the group you're involved in among your peers to be a part of it, to learn about Palestine? Maybe they didn't know about it before, or have people changed their opinions? I mean, what have you witnessed just at your school alone in the way that this genocide in Gaza has impacted people's views and the urgency to do something?
Yeah, most definitely. I think that, like you're saying, like we have reached a turning point, especially with the American public, where we're watching genocide like live stream on our phones, and there is really not a way to ignore it at this point. And I think that people are having to reckon with that themselves, saying, all right, this has continued on so long. I am complicit in this as an American citizen and as someone who's paying tax dollars to the American government. And so I think people are really having these reflective moments of, it's time to do something. I mean, I've had discussions with certain professors who have said, I really care about this issue, but I don't know if it's my right to say something. I don't know if I should really be involved. And the same with a lot of students saying, I'm not Palestinian or I'm not Jewish, so this is not my fight to fight. But I think it's so important that we really see I personally have seen a change with that at the Claremont colleges, where professors and students have said, you know what, like it's time for me to step up, because if we're complicit, it's time to refuse to be complicit any longer.
And, let me just ask you this. I'm curious what you would say to other students who may be watching this. I mean, I think one of the factors, you see so much on your phone. I think that's a great point. It can make you feel sometimes somewhat helpless. What would you say to other students who are also outraged, about what power they have?
Yeah, I think that, first off, we need to find every source of pressure possible to put on our institutions that are funding this genocide, whether that be start local, start with your school, your university, start with your city council. Look at the institutions where you have leverage. And then those eventually are going to influence larger institutions like the US government itself. I mean, we've seen a shift in the mainstream media, shift in the way that the Biden administration, at least, is on the surface talking about these issues. They sure continue to send weapons and bombs, but the pressure is adding up, and there are so many ways for you to engage. And so, start local, start with where you have impact, and engage there.
Mm-hmm. Well, we really appreciate you being willing to join us, and we really appreciate the Pitzer Students for Justice in Palestine. Bella Jacobs, thanks for giving us some of your time.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Well,
Rania?
that is always nice to see, and we need some good news in dark times. And that's actually huge news. It shouldn't be understated how important it is. All that work. I mean, she said 6 years ago that campaign started, and I really do hope it's a domino effect across campuses in the U.S.
Yeah, so do I. It's funny because, the school is now at great pains to say that they didn't do this because of any campaign. They just happened to just be randomly reviewing all the programs this year, and they just saw that it wasn't working. So that's, I think, oftentimes how you know things are working, when the people who have been forced to do it start immediately, backtracking, saying, no, of course, no, it was never the pressure, it never had anything to do with it. That's one thing I always tell people about the importance of reading history is every entity that is powerful is always saying that they're totally unaffected by criticism, because that if you say I'm affected by criticism, people will actually start pressuring you. But when you go back and you read the history, this is an important thing about the Vietnam War, because some people would say, oh, well, it didn't look like it was doing anything at all. And Lyndon Johnson, Nixon, they would always say, oh, these protests don't affect us, we don't care about these protests, this is nothing, this is just a minority of people. And then you read the history and you see behind the scenes they were extremely concerned, and almost all of their decisions in the context of Vietnam were being heavily shaped by how they thought public opinion was going to react to it. I mean, Nixon, who of course, was genocidal in his campaign in Vietnam, was spending all his time trying to present himself as someone who is for peace in Vietnam. So it just gives you a sense that a lot of times what you hear in real time is not actually what's going on. And that part of trying to get people from standing up, from protesting, from boycotting is acting like it doesn't matter because you don't want people to know. And I think we have to understand that psychological effect that is being played against us time and time again by the callousness of these officials to make you feel like you don't matter so you don't do anything. But I don't know of any major protest movement that has not had this sort of effect. It's just you don't really learn about how big of the effect was oftentimes till a little bit later, I think. And I think about 5 years from now,
protesting, you guys.
we'll be seeing. Yeah, keep protesting. I think if you care about it. I mean, if you don't, I guess do whatever you want to do. The 50 people hate watching this, I guess, won't be protesting it. But hopefully.
I think we're just going with that.
Well, it was, I think Rush Limbaugh, they used to say, I think it was 20% of viewers, 18%, I forget the exact number.
My dad was one of those
listened
people.
every day, hate listening to Rush every day.
My dad, when would drive me to school, and this God, I hate Rush Limbaugh's voice to this day because I remember hearing it on the way to school, and I'd always be like, "Why are you listening to this?" He's like, "You have to hear what the enemy's saying." That's what my dad would say.
Rush,
and
bro.
you know what?
Yeah,
he's one of those 20%. And actually, as a result, I absolutely hate read my political opponents, and I learned because of it. So there you go.
Well, there you go. Well, Rush Limbaugh's also dead, so you don't have to worry about his voice any longer.
That's true. That's true. Now we have Ben Shapiro,
whose voice is demonstrably worse. I'm sorry.
It's absolutely
so annoying, so nasally. But the scary part is that Ben Shapiro is in the top 5 of like post in traffic on Facebook every single day. Sometimes he's 1, sometimes he's 2, sometimes he's 5. But I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think the reason why is because, Facebook in the United States tends to skew older. And I feel that there have to be a lot of conservative Trump supporting type people whose grandkids, are all like leftist and socialist and communist. And I feel like Ben Shapiro is probably the grandchild they wish their grandchildren were when they sit around the Thanksgiving
that
table.
Makes so much sense.
So
They're like,
really
this is what
him.
the young generation should be like.
Yeah. That's my thought. I think if his audience is definitely not really young people. I mean, it's a little different with Charlie Kirk and the Turning Point USA people, but by and large, it's older people who are consuming this right-wing media. But they like to see these young people. Tomi Lahren, same thing. She's kind of disappeared.
I forgot she existed.
She moved her show to Fox Nation, the paywall thing, and then everyone forgot about her.
Wow,
except
you guys,
for,
that's what happens.
60-year-old men
I encourage these people to go behind paywalls, please.
Yeah, the more the better. The more the better. So what can you do? Wow, I can't even believe Rush Limbaugh came up. But nonetheless, if you are watching, whether you love it or hate it, I guess, just hit the like button so that we continue to stay here for your love or your hate. Nonetheless, so we're here to provide all emotions here, love and hate. Yeah. Let's move the movement forward here. We want to turn our attention back to the broader West Asian region and some of the fallout that we're seeing in many of the states surrounding Palestine and near environs as the ongoing genocide moves forward. We are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Giorgio Cafaro, who is the CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Giorgio, as always, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you guys. Let's please try to avoid talking about Ben Shapiro.
I promise that I won't bring it up. I can't control Rania, unfortunately, so maybe she will. But I wanted to start with some of this change. I mean, obviously, we've seen a lot of different dynamics obviously be changed by what's happening in Gaza. It's obviously such a moving issue. I mean, we've seen in Jordan, especially recently now, the ongoing protests that have been happening, and maybe not even necessarily Jordan specifically, although that's the one that's on my mind. But do you feel that this conflict, this genocide and what we see happening in Palestine is having a lasting effect, maybe it's subterranean, on many of these regional countries where people obviously are very in favor of the Palestinian cause, but their governments are sometimes lagging behind?
Yeah, I think even if the genocide were to stop tomorrow, everything that's happened throughout the past 6 months will probably change the Middle East for many years, if not decades to come. Obviously, what's going on in Palestine is having huge effects throughout the wider Arab region. It's felt most intensely, I think, in the countries that are geographically closest to Israel, Palestine, the ones that feel the heat the most from everything that's taking place in Gaza. But really, for the most part, across the Arab world, I think what we see is something that we've known even before October 7th, but it's just more and more highlighted these days, is that the Palestinian issue really demonstrates a lot of weakness and vulnerabilities of different Arab regimes. What we realize is that these Arab governments definitely have to strike some very, very delicate balancing acts. On one hand, they have societies filled with people who are obviously very emotional about the Palestinian issue, and they have to cater to that. And that is usually in the form of kind of rhetoric and symbolic moves at the UN, putting out certain statements. But at the same time, a lot of these regimes are very dependent on the US for economic and security support. And they also don't want to directly challenge Israel. So they're in a very, very delicate, they're in a very sensitive and vulnerable state right now. And I think this is why we see these Arab governments pushing so hard to try to get the Biden administration to pressure Israel into agreeing to a ceasefire. I don't think it's, excuse me for being cynical, I don't think it's really so much about caring for the Palestinian people, but it's more about these governments wanting to preserve sort of a status quo order inside their own borders and throughout the wider region.
No, so those are really good points, Giorgio. And I want to ask you specifically about Saudi Arabia, because we saw this sort of indefinite postponement of the U.S. delegation that was supposed to go to Saudi Arabia. Jake Sullivan and I think Brett McGurk and was it Amos Hochstein or trying to push this idea that normalization between the Saudis and Israelis is still possible. But the fact that they postponed it indefinitely, I mean, one, does that mean that this is dead in the water? And then just to add to the Saudi question here, the Saudis are saying that they have these preconditions for normalization. They're not shutting down the idea entirely, but they're saying they have preconditions, and that includes Palestinian statehood, which, of course, is not something the Israelis are going to agree to. So I guess the question I'm going to ask with that is this even realistic, or is this just the Saudis buying time in a moment when they know that they can't sell normalization to their own population?
Yeah, it's a good question. At the end of last year, the pro-Israel think tank in DC, WINEP, Washington Institute for Near East Policy, put out they released their findings of a poll that they conducted in Saudi Arabia, and they found out that 96% of the Saudi population believes that all Arab states should cut off all political, diplomatic, and economic relations with Israel. So the Saudi leadership obviously cannot ignore where the public stands. Even before October 7th, normalization would have been incredibly risky from a political standpoint in Saudi Arabia. But I mean, there's a consensus among pretty much everyone in the kingdom that Israel is waging a genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. It's just at this point, the talk of normalization under current circumstances would just be way too toxic for the leadership in Saudi Arabia to consider. I think probably after the dust settles in Gaza, we'll see the Saudis and Israelis cooperating and coordinating in some under the table ways. There's going to be sort of an economic normalization that will probably continue to go forward. But in terms of establishing full-fledged diplomatic relations, I don't see that happening for a long time. That being said, people in the Biden administration and many people here in DC seem to think that this is the path that Saudi Arabia is going down. I think they don't really understand the predicament that the Saudi leadership faces right now. They are continuing to push this agenda of bringing Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords.
On the same token, I wonder what you think about the sort of state of the sort of Saudi-Iran rapprochement. I mean, obviously it's sort of tentative engagement, but it does seem like both sides are continuing to try to engage with each other. I mean, I noticed that, at least allegedly, according to a report I saw the other day, that, Saudi Arabia was a back channel from Iran to the United States. So, I mean, it does seem that they're still trying to talk and still trying to, bridge different gaps. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot there for those two countries to come closer, but it has been, interesting, I think, to note in this past couple months that it does seem that both sides are continuing to sort of actively try to engage with one another.
Yeah, just last month marked the 1-year anniversary of Saudi Arabia and Iran signing the renormalization agreement in Beijing. And the fact of the matter is, ever since that moment in which they signed the diplomatic deal in China, they've taken steps to really build on that deal, with embassies reopening, the ambassadors going back. Last year in November, Raisi was the first Iranian president to come to Saudi Arabia since 2012. So it's really clear that both Riyadh and Tehran want to build on the renormalization, and the fact that the Gaza war and its expansion into other parts of the Middle East has not thrown off this detente in Saudi-Iranian relations, I think really speaks to the depth of this effort to improve relations on the part of both Saudi Arabia and Iran. I think both countries still see it very much in their interest to not return to the state of sky-high hostilities that was taking place only a few years ago. That being said, there certainly are some deep suspicions that both countries have of the other. It's not a relationship that's free of tension, but I think both sides realized it was in their interests to engage in more dialogue and diplomacy. And the fact of the matter is the Gaza war has, to some extent, I would argue, highlighted how there even is some alignment between the Saudis and the Iranians. They're both demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. They're both opposed to what Israel is doing in Gaza, and they've been able to sort of come together in different instances to sort of show their support for diplomatic efforts aimed at winding down the conflict.
Giorgio, I also wanted to, I guess we're just going to go country by country here, but I have a couple questions for you about the UAE. First off, we had this visit a couple weeks ago. It was a really big deal. The Hezbollah official Wafid Safa visited the UAE for over negotiations over the prisoner file, which is something that was had been going on earlier. I don't believe this was connected to the current situation in Gaza, but it does speak to some sort of shift with the UAE, which is obviously, very anti-Hezbollah. So I'm curious if you can talk about the significance of that. I know that you recently wrote a piece on that, but furthermore, with regard to the UAE, and here I go just like smashing two questions in one once again, but do you think, to bring it to the issue of Gaza, are current regional tensions, do you believe, at all impacting the UAE's ability to continue to integrate its economy with Israel's following its normalization deal?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's important to realize that the UAE has been making some adjustments in its foreign policy in recent years, conducting much more of, I would say, sort of a non-aligned foreign policy, or maybe we can say sort of a multi-aligned strategy to geopolitics. The UAE has improved its relationship with Iran, renormalized with Syria. It also entered into this normalization agreement with Israel, mended fences with Qatar. So the UAE is trying to be more of a neutral state in the region, and also internationally, the UAE is trying to become much more autonomous from the West. And we see the UAE moving a lot closer to Russia and China, as well as India. So it's sort of like a foreign policy of kind of, 360 degrees of partnerships. Israel is definitely important to the UAE, and as the UAE wants to sort of establish itself as more of a kind of geoeconomic hub that links the global north to the global south, links Africa to Asia, Asia to Europe, so on and so forth. The UAE definitely values its relationship with Israel, and I would say probably Emirati-Israeli normalization is irreversible. I do not see the suffering in Gaza leading to a situation whereby Abu Dhabi would abrogate the Abraham Accords. What the UAE has been trying to do, and this is really more about optics than anything else, is to speak out against Israel. And the Emirati officials have been quite vocal and quite confident when it comes to condemning Israel. At the time of the Gaza war breaking out, the UAE was the only Arab country sitting on the UN Security Council. And so the UAE sort of took advantage of that position to sort of stand up internationally to condemn what Israel's doing. But again, that's really about words and rhetoric. Below the surface, I don't really think the UAE-Israel relationship has changed much because of what's going on in Gaza. There's not even really been like any downgrading of relations. There was a news article today in an Israeli media site saying that the UAE was going to cease diplomatic cooperation with Israel. I don't know how much credibility there is or even what it means to cease diplomatic cooperation as long as the diplomatic relations still exist. So, short answer here, I think the UAE is trying to really move ahead as business as usual when it comes to the normalization process with Israel. And I'll just add as a final point, one of the reasons why the UAE wants to do this is because being the driver behind the Abraham Accords has given the UAE so much maneuverability in Washington. It did a lot to really get the pro-Israel lobby in Washington on the side of the UAE. There are so many things the UAE has done that upset the diplomatic establishment in Washington, whether we're talking about working with the Wagner Group in Africa, talking about the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, reintegration of the Syrian government into the regional fold. All of these things the UAE has done upset policymakers in Washington. But every time there's some criticism of the UAE, people say, well, there's the Abraham Accords, so let's be sure not to criticize the UAE. And I would argue it's probably this factor about the UAE's position and its image in Washington helps us understand why the UAE, I really don't think, will be pulling out of the normalization deal.
Well, one thing I heard, I don't know how true it is, but that's what people are saying, is that the UAE is behind the scenes lobbying Congress, the U.S. Congress. Rania, can you not hear me?
Yeah, I just your volume seems to have gone down. Is that just me, or is
I
it
don't
you
know.
too, Giorgio? Oh, now you're normal. Now you're
Okay,
leveled. All
thank
right,
you.
go
All
ahead,
right,
Eugene.
there it is. I was
Yeah.
being sabotaged. Unit 8802. But anyway, long story short, I heard, I don't know how true it is, but that UAE is lobbying behind the scenes Congress to lift the Caesar sanctions on Syria. But the relevant thing to me about that is it does seem that the sort of, well, it's not sort of, the attempt by the Gulf states to back the efforts to change governments there in Syria has now totally reversed, and that it seems that pretty much most of the Gulf states and many of the Arab states seem to be back on board with bringing Syria back into the fold. And I don't know how much of that is in relationship to just the changed circumstances on the ground, both in Syria and different places. But I wonder your evaluation of the possibilities of some of America's allies sort of shifting sands here on the U.S. potential stance towards Syria, if it will have any difference at all. Oh, you're muted.
Is that from our end? Wow, today is just full of audio mishaps. I blame Ben Shapiro.
Can't hear you yet.
Sorry, guys. I know I wasn't supposed to bring up his name, but somehow this is his fault. 100%.
Let's see. I think it could be on our side. Let me check here. Not 100% sure.
Where are our tech gurus?
Well, I'm going to assume they're figuring it out now. I hope that's what they're doing, is figuring it out now.
Or we call this technological gremlins.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
Thank you.
I'll always
I'm
bring
glad.
that up. For those who've been watching Breakthrough for a long time, watching our live streams, they know what we're talking about. I don't even know. I think you said someone else said that like 2 years ago, and I just stuck with it. The idea that there's technological gremlins.
Yeah.
And by technological gremlins, we mean the CIA guys.
Yeah.
the NSA.
Yeah.
Unit 8200.
Yeah.
The TPLF. I don't know. We've blamed lots of people for
somebody.
for tech mishaps on the show.
Well, we'll see what's happening here. It is a Roald Dahl story. That's where it comes from. He was an RAF pilot, and when they would have problems in the planes during World War II. They would say, oh, it's gremlins. So he wrote a little short story about gremlins and the aspect of it. So that's where it came from.
Oh, so you turned that into technological gremlins. I
No,
love that.
you started calling them technological gremlins. I just told the story about the gremlins when we were waiting
Oh,
for
did
a
I
guest to
add
come
the
back.
word
That's all.
technological?
You did.
I love that. I'm gonna, you know what? If I ever write a book, I don't
Mhm.
care what it's about. I'm calling it technological gremlins.
Well,
That's
let
a
me tell
cool
you,
name.
if you are as successful as Roald Dahl, it'll be great.
Yeah, I can't write that many books.
Yeah.
It's too much.
But they're short. They're children's
It
books.
doesn't matter.
That's
It's like so much creativity involved.
yeah, the BFG. But anyway, let's not even get into Roald Dahl. Who, yeah, also there's an underside to Roald Dahl, I'll tell you too. But let's leave that for another day. But no, we're working to get Giorgio back here, so we'll hold on that. But I think it's an important conversation, and obviously, I think it speaks to the point you were raising earlier, Rania, which is pretty much everywhere. The impact of Gaza on the sort of political scene. There's sort of a pre and post October 7th element to it, I think, from Canada to the United States. Okay, I think we have Giorgio back, so I won't go on my tour of the world. Giorgio, thanks.
The first time I was on your guys' show, the tech failures happened and we started talking about the Caesar Act. So I have a tough time dismissing this as a
Whoa.
coincidence.
Yes.
Coincidence? I think not.
We can't naively dismiss it as a coincidence.
Mhm.
No.
Well,
Once
please.
is a coincidence. Twice?
Yes. Before whoever it was cut you off, you were saying.
Okay. Yeah, we'll try to talk about this for as long as we can before we get cut off next time. The UAE and the US are definitely not on the same page when it comes to Syria. The UAE definitely thinks the Caesar Act is a very problematic policy. The UAE definitely is really the Arab state that's driving the Arab efforts to bring Syria back into the fold. A number of years before Saudi Arabia renormalized with Damascus was when the UAE, actually back in December 2018, reopened its embassy inside Damascus. That being said, as long as the US is imposing the Caesar Act, it seems that, at least for now, that is having the effect of preventing the Gulf states from making big investments in Syria, because as everyone knows, the Caesar Act comes with these secondary sanctions. So it's not just US entities that would be punished under this legislation for doing business with Syria, but also third parties all over the world, including in countries such as the UAE. But I think the UAE is looking at Syria with a sort of a very long-term approach and thinking that at some point even the West is going to sort of come around to renormalizing with the Syrian government. And I think the thinking in Abu Dhabi is that when there are opportunities to make investments in Syria, the UAE will sort of receive priorities and special treatment, because so early on, before many other Arab states were willing to re-embrace Assad, the UAE was, reopening its embassy in Damascus in 2018 and then welcoming Bashar al-Assad himself into the UAE as early as March 2022. And all of that stuff, the Syrian government will definitely be remembering for a long time.
Indeed.
And
And
please,
now,
Rania,
of
go ahead.
course, no, I was just going to say, now, of course, Syria is in a strange situation where it's normalized with a lot of these countries, but because of those sanctions, it still can't really quite have the economic relationship it wants. And then it gets bombed by Israel. Whether it's like Aleppo, they bomb Aleppo all the time now. It's just normal. Or the Syrian Golan, or, Damascus, where they just bombed the Iranian embassy. I was just adding,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if
Well,
there's
let me
anything
just
you want to
ask
say
you-
about the significance of go ahead.
Well,
go
if
ahead.
you want to speak to the
This is
significance of
all-
that, but
asking
I
so
want
many
to add
questions.
one element. I do want to add one element that I think is notable. What do you think in the context of a lot of these things we've been talking about, the renormalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, a more balanced view of regional relations, countries, Oman comes to mind, to some degree Iraq comes to mind, who sort of have been doing a lot of diplomatic work to try to set the table for around these. Do you think there's some level of vindication for some of the states that have been arguing for a more balanced sort of regional relationship, between the Gulf states and Iran, between the various Arab states themselves, in the context of what we see happening now?
That's a great question. And you're absolutely right that there were a number of Arab countries, such as Oman and Qatar, that for a long time said the way to deal with the tensions between Iran and certain countries in the Arab world was through diplomacy and more dialogue, and that it was important to sort of bring Iran into regional security initiatives rather than trying to isolate Iran. And from the perspective of Omani and Qatari policymakers, they very much welcome the renormalization of Saudi Iranian relations. And I think, as everyone knows, it was really actually Oman and Iraq that did the very heavy lifting to bring about that renormalization deal. While China gets a lot of the credit, the fact of the matter is the Omanis and the Iraqis did really the hard work. And then when it was basically about 95% done, they needed the deal to sort of be signed in a global capital, the capital of a global power, so it would have some more legitimacy, and that you could have a large power like China kind of be the guarantor. So they moved over to Beijing basically to sign the agreement. But again, it was really Muscat and Baghdad that did a lot of the hard work to bring the Saudis and Iranians to that point. And I think in general, there's a view among pretty much all the countries in the Gulf, for the most part, that Iran is a permanent neighbor, and that while U.S. foreign policy will change and many international circumstances will change, the fact that Iran exists in this part of the world is a permanent factor, and that it's ultimately in their interests to find a way to sort of share the neighborhood with Iran and not count on a country like the United States to always be protecting them from Iran, but instead to find a way to live with the Iranians. And in my opinion, this is extremely healthy and necessary.
Well, it has been very fantastic to have you, as always, here. Giorgio Cafera, CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Really appreciate you giving us some of your time here in the Freedom
Thank
Side.
you.
Well, I'm glad that we got to finally have the Caesar Act question answered, and whoever was responsible for getting in the way of that twice, we see you.
Yes.
We know
It's
what you're
true.
up to.
Just hopefully you hit the like
We're
button.
on to you. Yeah. Just make sure you hit the like button and all will be forgiven.
Yes.
Also, if you'd like to become a member of Breakthrough News, we do encourage that as well.
Everybody's, all money is green, right? Yeah, before we get out of here today on a serious note, Rania, I did just want to note, one important issue that is, unfortunately not known to many people around the world, and that is the ongoing persecution of our very good friends here at Breakthrough News, of the journalist at NewsClick in India. NewsClick in India, many people don't know, is the #1 news site for the struggles of working class people, the farmers, all these other pieces. If you remember, obviously we've seen the farmers protest this year, but if you remember the big farmers protest that happened, I guess that was 2022 now, not 2023, but I might be wrong about that. Either way, NewsClick was really doing more than any other outlet in India or anywhere around the world to bring the voice of the farmers directly to the forefront. When the Indian trade unions had the biggest strike that's ever happened, they were there at the forefront. In the southern Indian state of Kerala, which has a communist government that does many very interesting things, including around COVID, they were at the forefront of bringing that to the attention of the world. They've engaged on a range of different issues that are crucially important for all of us. The People's Science movement there in India has found a voice from NewsClick talking about the important and critical elements of how we use knowledge. And I say all that just to say that, Prabir Perkayashta, who is the head of NewsClick, is currently imprisoned in India. He is being held in indefinite detention under a set of laws called UAPA, which are, just a mockery of any, sense of democracy. It basically allows you to hold people indefinitely with no evidence whatsoever. They have created now, and they've brought to the forefront, this totally fake charge sheet with Prabir, and they've tried to make it seem legitimate by having it be 8,000 pages long. I can only imagine what is in those 8,000 pages. But nonetheless, they are accusing Prabir, and by extension, NewsClick and everyone affiliated with them, of being agents of China that are, in Indian terminology, anti-national and are trying to overthrow the government. And that just to give you a sense, so because they reported on the farmers that were protesting the policies of not just the Modi government, but several governments prior to that had impoverished the farmers, because they're supporting the workers who are fighting for higher wages and better working conditions, because they're talking about critical issues for India and how India relates to the country of the region, because they're discussing laws like the Citizenship Amendment Act and also some of the things around Kashmir, which are obviously critical, important issues domestically to how India runs its country. They have been labeled as agents of China, as trying to take down the government. And the whole reason they're being labeled like this is because they're willing to report the uncomfortable facts about the government there in India, and not just the government, but more importantly, the big business interests that lie behind the BJP government and have lied behind, quite frankly, many other governments beyond that. It's not like they're just criticizing Modi or anything like that. They're criticizing everybody who is doing things against their sort of core base, which is peasants and workers and other progressive people there in India. This is obviously a part of a bigger, broader crackdown that is happening all across India on progressive people by this attempt by the BJP government to turn India, which is obviously a great country of much diversity, into a one-note, semi-fascist, right-wing billionaires paradise. 1% of the population in India controls 40% of the wealth, and that might even be an understatement, but that fact came out several weeks ago. But we have seen, so many people, so many activists who have been victimized under this UAPA law. Unfortunately, Father Stan, one of them, actually died in prison. They held him there so long that he died. He was suffering from Parkinson's. They wouldn't give him any health conditions. So Prabir, who is also older, it's a very dangerous situation. He was actually the first person arrested in the emergency in 1975 when Indira Gandhi, ended sort of the democratic period there in India for several years. And now he's become one of the signal people. There are elections starting in India in just a couple weeks. And I don't think that it's any mistake that this, so-called charge sheet that has no evidence, and it's important to note that there is no evidence here. And in fact, in the public sphere, for those who want to go look, the lawyers for NewsClick and for others who have been named in this have in fact put forward in the Hindu, which is the paper of record amongst other places in India, the exact facts of the case, that no money was received from any Chinese government or Chinese Communist Party-led entity, that in fact an American individual has been falsely labeled as a Chinese spy, and that this money that was totally legal, the finances of NewsClick that complied with every single law that's on the books in India. There is no truth to this whatsoever. And unfortunately, the New York Times is a major part of this because they wrote a story. David Fahrenholt is the author, if you want to find him on social media and let him know how you feel about this, that said that these lies were true. They also had no evidence, but they claimed that NewsClick was part of a worldwide Chinese conspiracy. Even us at Breakthrough News were caught up in this. And this totally fake yellow journalism by David Fahrenholt, so-called reporter at the New York Times, the so-called all the news that's fit to print, has been used by the Indian government and certainly by the right-wing, handmaidens of the Indian government on this case to try to suggest that Prabir and others are agents of China. Nothing could be further from the truth. NewsClick, of course, has only been standing up for the rights of they've just been covering the Indian people who are standing up for their rights, to exercise democracy in a real sense. It's social, economic, as well as political. And of course, we're seeing many different things. Arvind Kejriwal, of course, the chief minister of Delhi, who has been arrested. There's another chief minister of another state who's been arrested. We're seeing an increase in these cases. So in the context of, and I'll just get ready to close on this, Rania. In the context of the elections, it's very clear that these cases are being used as political pawns, to really try to drive votes for the BJP by creating the perception that there's a Chinese plot and also actually an American plot if you read what they're saying. Interesting how they say that they're basically doing the same thing at the same time, to try to take down the country, to try to drive a nationalistic vote towards the BJP, to cover up, many of the crimes that they're committing, the terrible bigotry that's happening against Muslims, the criminalization of farmers and workers organizations, the brutal attacks that their workers are carrying out in the election campaign towards the left and towards others, burning down and bulldozing people's houses, attacking people, beating people. But nonetheless, it's all designed to create this fake reality. And I think it's important to say, and this is why I wanted to say it on this show, because there is an effort that is going on right now. And, look, I'm not saying this to be like against Russian media or anything like that, but it's being amplified in English heavily by these Russian media outlets, RT and Sputnik. People who know me know I used to work at Sputnik, so I'm not out here just to rip them. But it's a BJP narrative that all of the criticism of India is a U.S. George Soros plot to take down India, to move it into the pro-imperialist camp. And to be fair, there are attempts by liberal forces and imperialist forces to influence the politics of India. I'm not denying that. But if there is no doubt in my mind, it's that NewsClick and the people around NewsClick and the political parties of the left in India are the biggest enemies of imperialism in India. When the BJP was okay with working with the United States as they are now in the anti-China conspiracy, because that's what they're for. They're part of this fake Indo-Pacific. When Congress signed was working with them to sign the deal with the United States in 2004, these were the only people who really stood up. So we have to make sure that we have clarity here, about what's happening in India, and that we don't sort of, wrap up. That I just don't want people to get caught up in this because it's fake. It's totally fake. And we need to continue to raise our voices. If you go to 1804books.com, you can buy Prabir's newest book, which is called Knowledge as Commons, which is a great book about the uses and abuses of technology in the 21st century. But very important to recognize that this so-called charge sheet is completely and totally fake. No Chinese money was coming to them. This is complete demonization, and it's part of a worldwide campaign by right-wing political forces to try to isolate China on the world stage to prevent them from, having any sort of influence that could check the rise of U.S. imperialism by making every single progressive movement anywhere in the world a so-called agent of China. It's happening there. It's happening in South Africa. It's happening all over. But it's really, really dangerous, and it's really, really unfortunate. So I just wanted to note that as we go into election season in India, because I think that there's a lot of misinformation going around about this.
Absolutely. I think that was a really good explanation of all that, Eugene, and I'm glad that you threw in the New York Times in there. And on that note, I know we're wrapping here, and very quickly before my electricity goes out,
Please.
I want to remind everybody that you can become a member of Breakthrough News and access exclusive content by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. Help keep independent media alive and growing if you have the means to. Also, make sure to smash that like button.
Smash that like button.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Love
All
it.
those things are good.
Yeah.
As always, for myself, for Rania, for our entire team here at Breakthrough News, shout out to all our guests, shout out to all of our viewers, shout out to all our patrons. And as always, we will see you next time.